Today, I'm going to focus on some key requirements to comply with U.S. immigration law with remote workforces and some general considerations when hiring foreign nationals as employers feel the impact of the current labor shortage here in the U.S. Next slide, please. So one of the fundamental requirements of U.S. immigration law is properly completing an I-9 for every employee hired. And that involves physically inspecting the List A document or List B and List C documents taken together, presented by the employee within 3 days of the start of employment. And again, that requirement is physical inspection, meaning in-person inspection of the document when completing Section 2 of the I-9. So because so many workforces have gone full remote, the Department of Homeland Security has provided a flexibility stating that those documents can be inspected remotely. And that flexibility was recently extended to October 31st, 2022. And again, the remote inspection can occur over Zoom, Microsoft Teams, some sort of video link, or the employee can provide scans, photocopies of the List A document or List B and List C documents through email, and they can be inspected that way. Next slide, please. So the specific language of the temporary exemption from the physical inspection requirement is that if employees for employees hired on or after April 1st, 2021, if they work exclusively in a remote setting due to COVID-19 precautions, they're temporarily exempt from the requirement that employers physically inspect, meaning verify in person, the List A document or the List B and List C documents when they complete the I-9. When these workforces return to in-person employment, the employers must physically inspect those documents, or they must physically inspect the documents when this temporary exemption expires. And as I mentioned earlier, the temporary exemption is due to expire right now on October 31st, 2022. It has been continuously extended since March of 2020. So there's an expectation that it may be extended beyond October 31st, 2022, but that's a date to watch out for when considering when does the employer have to physically inspect the document presented by the employee to prove their employment eligibility. If the employee has returned to some sort of hybrid setup or is coming into the office on a regular, consistent, predictable basis, that temporary exemption no longer applies and the employer has to physically inspect that document in person. And I provided a link there for the specific language of the exemption if you'd like. Next slide, please. So because the language of the rule is specific about the exemption going into effect on April 1st for employees hired on or after April 1st, 2021, the question is, what about employees hired between March 20th, 2020 and April 1st, 2021? And for that period of time, for employees hired during that period, the Department of Homeland Security has said that they will evaluate I-9s completed on a case-by-case basis. So I think that means that, best practice is if you inspected the document remotely, document that fact on Section 2 of the I-9, write that remote inspection occurred on month, date, year, and who inspected the document remotely. And that generally is, the Department of Homeland Security has indicated would be acceptable, again, as long as the workforce was fully remote. If the employee was coming into the office during that time, that remote inspection would not comply with the requirement to physically inspect the document A or the documents B and C taken together. Next slide, please. Again, like I said, the remote inspection can occur over video chat, or the employee can look at scans of the documents that are sent by fax or email. And the I-9 requirement is that that inspection occur within 3 days of the employee starting the employment. Next slide, please. So, as workforces continue to be remote, for employees who are on a work visa, there are very specific considerations. I highlighted one here for employees using the H-1B work visa, which is the most common type of work visa in the US. Again, this would be a foreign national using an H-1B work visa to work. If they have gone remote, meaning they're hired pre-COVID, and at some point in the past 2.5 years, they have moved to a completely new residence, or they're reporting to a different office, the work site location on the visa has to be amended, because that work site location is tied to the required minimum wage, and it's tied to how often the employee has to report to an office. There are very specific considerations. So for employees on work visas, it's important to look at where is he or she working, and when the company did go remote, did that employee move, and did they move outside of a normal commuting distance to the worksite location that was listed on the work visa application. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to go into some general considerations when offering employment to a foreign national, which is becoming more frequent due to the US labor shortage. I get a lot of questions from employers who are considering hiring a foreign national who's located inside the United States, or a foreign national who's located outside of the United States, meaning they want to bring them into the US to work for the company. So for foreign nationals who are located inside of the United States, they're typically on some other type of visa, whether it's a student visa or a visitor visa, and they apply for the job. And the first major consideration is what questions can the employer ask during the recruitment about that person's eligibility to work in the United States? Because the questions cannot be, are you a US citizen? They can be, are you authorized to work in the United States? Or do you require visa sponsorship? They can be open-ended like that, but they cannot get into the specific eligibility to work in the United States in order to not violate discrimination laws. When the prospective employee says, yes, I need visa sponsorship, then there are questions that the employer should ask to make sure that visa sponsorship is possible. And those, are specific. They can be, how long have you been on a certain type of work visa? What other visas have you held in the past? Have you ever had a green card process initiated for you? Those are good questions to ask. And I put that the most common transition for foreign nationals located inside the United States who are applying for jobs here is the student visa to optional practical training to H-1B timeline. So that is student attends school here in the United States, graduates with a degree, is able to work on an extension of the student visa, which is referred to as optional practical training, to get training within the United States in his or her field of study. And then the optional practical training is valid for 12 months, or for STEM fields, it's valid for 36 months. And then during that period, the employee has to transition to an H-1B work visa in order to continue working here for over the next several years. For foreign nationals located outside of the United States, there are a lot more considerations regarding timing and logistics, because that application for a visa to bring someone over has to go through the US Department of State. The US Department of State is still severely backlogged due to COVID. And so not only is it trying to plan out some sort of timeline for when the employer can expect that the employee will be able to fly to the United States, there are also COVID-19 related travel restrictions. So the employee who's coming into the United States has to be fully vaccinated with acceptable vaccination, which is not always the case in certain countries. So in terms of, again, when will the employee be physically present in the United States and be able to start working? That's more challenging when they're currently outside of the US. I did include that TN visas for Canadian or Mexican nationals. Those are special visas for Canadian citizens or Mexican citizens with offers of employment for certain professional occupations. Those are more predictable in terms of timing because Canadian citizens can apply for these visas at the port of entry at the border, and Mexican citizens can apply for these visas directly to the US Embassy in Mexico, and the timing for that is not as uncertain. And that is all I have for you this morning. I will